Ladies and gentlemen, in this presentation, we are going to be looking at some of the steps which are really important to set the business guidelines over the next 12 months. So, what we are looking with this presentation is some of those important tips and tricks which could essentially increase the potential of scaling up the business to an unprecedented level to the tune of 1 crore and above in a matter of just 1 year itself. All right. So, what's the challenge that we are seeing today in the market? People, many of the organizations and the entrepreneurs who are kind of looking at their revenues to become generalist, which means jack of all trades and master of none. And that's causing a major challenge because there is no niche or the specialty that they hone in front of their clients. And this is a major setback because this strategy often backfires and it causes ton of challenges because of low value engagement that happen. And due to this, what happens is simply there's a vicious cycle or a trap or a loop that gets triggered at the entry level, because of which a business is unable to scale to a certain level, and that's where the major bone of contention a lot of people typically faces. Now, the rationale that we are looking at from this presentation is about working on the business from the lens of a specialist, having the advantage, and these are certain advantages which are of course there from the point of target problem solving, premium pricing for expertise, and building trust and credibility. So let's look at all of the one by one. So if you zero in on what target problem solving is all about, it gives an incentive to work with a specific audience, and these specific audiences come up with specific requirement, and these problems are very significant and tailor made and customized basis what the requirement of that customer is. Another advantage that I see with the specialist model is there's a premium pricing that could potentially be given, provided to those niche segment of customers with us asking for a certain level of premium services, and with a specified level of expertise on the consulting background. And this is really sought after field. As far as all the researches that has happened is that specializing on a specific niche vertical creates its own USP out there in the market. And of course, while an organization works on building trust and credibility, the service provider is typically able to foster, great collaboration with the organizations to whom the services are being provided, and it leads to high quality clients retention over a longer period of time. Now, the tip that I would offer you is to look at yourself as a premium specialist as opposed to just a generalist. And some of the closed niche markets which are there are, from the likes of any industry vertical that you are expert on. Choose that. Identify a specific pain point of a customer and try to solve those business problems with your unique solutions or services that you bring onto the table. And you build in the core offer, which is about the entire value stack over a period of time, how exactly it could further scale up the business of your customer, and in a way creating a win-win niche for you as well. And of course, it actually leads to a lot of clarity. So bring in the level of clarity, which is really important for the purpose of having discussions. And moving on, it's about building a system with a building mindset, which means effectively it's all about growing along with the customer, and creating this mindset where it's a win-win situation for both the parties, the service provider as well as the customer or a client who is rendering those services. Now, it's about a certain methodical approach towards towards the thought process of the organization has to happen from the ground up, meaning that right from the very beginning, even from the point of hiring additional team members, has to happen in a very very selective fashion, because that individual needs to get immersed into the culture of the organization, And accordingly, it is also important to have automation processes ingrained into the entire process, where some of these repeated tasks can be done by while leveraging the power of technologies, agentic AIs, and the use of some of these modern tools that are out there available in the market. Now, what are some of the core systems to build? Let's deep dive into some of these aspects of how exactly the approach should be as far as the discussions with the customers are concerned. The lead qualification funnel has to be as effective as possible, which means that it is not about the quantity of the leads, it's about the quality of the leads. And it is a no brainer that eventually, over a period of time, deselection or filtering of all those unnecessary leads would essentially save ton of time, as opposed to finding out the needle in the haystack, wherein the potential clients are really willing to work with you and willing to spend premium for you for the services that you are offering onto the table. And of course, while the lead generation process happens, it is important that some of the personalized approach should be taken into consideration, meaning it should be VSL or a video sales letter that needs to go to the customer to give a very customized, personalized experience to that individual, because ultimately it's not about organization to organization, it's about individual doing business with an individual. And this relationship eventually works out quite well and pays tremendous dividends over a period of time, while having those kind of customers where there is a strong relationship and stickiness eventually with the customer and the organization. And the onboarding process, while the customer has actually gone ahead with the purchase of the solution, it's very important to have the onboarding journey to be as smooth as possible, meaning there are as minimal bottlenecks as possible, and then the steps and the expectations are all well aligned, so as to have a clear guidelines defined to leave any ambiguity as possible. And these are very important for setting the right expectation in order to nurture that relationship with the customer. The delivery framework is really crucial, because any framework which has got the aspects of the repeated business, repeated processes that needs to be leveraged through the power of the technology, and anything which are to be customized, that has to be approached through a human intervention, because that's how the relationship is nurtured over a period of time and brings in more consistency and efficiency. And ultimately, it leads to a greater client satisfaction, because satisfied customer will lead to repeat businesses, and ultimately there will be an increase in the overall bottom line revenue. Now, looking at some of the aspects on time efficiency and the increased capacity, meaning in today's modern world, everybody is kind of looking at implementing systems which are, time tested, and at the same time, it is very, very cost effective in terms of the amount of time being utilized for having the deployment of some of these capacities done within the customer's framework. Meaning, if there are some identified processes which are repetitive in nature and which could otherwise be automated, that has to happen. And this is no longer an option. It's actually a mandatory component that needs to be implemented, because the machines, the agents are able to work 24/7 and with minimal margin for error, because they learn from the past occurrences, and therefore a minimal oversight in some of these repeated tasks is really no longer an option. It's actually a given fact in order to scale a business to a certain level. Along the lines, it's important to look at the overall productivity, which means that the resources should be utilized in such a fashion that the billable hours are well justified in terms of the investment of time, effort, capital, energy, and overall return on investment that a customer is paying. Now, when we talk about scalability, it's very important that the scalability has to go hand in hand with the cost saving as well. Because while there's a cost saving, that saving itself can be repumped into the system to have further scalable model in the system, and therefore it minimizes the need for larger teams, and it increases the business productivity, because some of these things are already thought through, and strategic investments are already done into the people, process, as well as the technology. And that's where an effective service provider would essentially make a lot of sense, while having this sort of an engagement with the customers, wherein there's a clear clear definition of cost saving and scalability in the business. Now, looking at emphasizing on the fact that why video sales letters are really crucial. So, we will look at the important aspects. It actually helps in building the trust. It leads to certain level of authority, and obviously, there's an urgency proof that there's a call to action into a cohesive narrative, and this is a very powerful way of engaging with the customer, and therefore, essentially, it makes faster acquisition of premium customers because the customers really feel at ease, and they feel that their voices are being heard, and therefore they are able to do businesses in many of the occasions. It actually goes in an autopilot mode. Moving on, looking at some of these aspects of what could be the important nitty-gritties of setting up a VSL is all about. You got to have a very strong hook to grab the attention, and it's very important to establish the credibility, because unless you sound authentic and you mean authentic, and your intentions are coherent with each other, customers are not going to trust you. And it's about identifying the problem and the pain points, and then mitigating and addressing those challenges with the solutions that you are to offer. Next is about the solution introduction. Obviously, the problems are going to be solved by the introduction of the solutions, and the trust and credibility will further be harnessed with the use of the case studies and customer testimonials, which positively impacts the brand recall of a service provider who would typically provide these offerings to the customers. And you offer with certain urgency, because unless there is a need created with certain urgency, there is no possibility that the business would essentially be closed. And of course, there's a call to action which is needed as well. Now, when we move ahead, as far as the impact of the video sales letters or the VSLs are there, let's deep dive into some of these things which are concerned. So it is a versatile application across niches, which means that in a typical consulting or a coaching and agency services, that this really works quite wonders. And this also allows entrepreneurs to tailor their messages to diverse audiences while maintaining a consistent and impactful approach. Next bit is about the predictability of the high ticket client acquisition, which is very much possible because of the use of the VSLs, because customers really come forward and understand the urgency of certain investments, which is really, really critical for the growth of their business. So it's not about the service provider offering the services, it's about the customer or the client asking for those services in a very urgent fashion. So obviously it leads to a very predictable businesses in converting the high ticket client acquisition. Last but not the least, it's about the use of 24/7 automation, which is again is possible with the use of the paid ads, and that's what the power of the ads are in today's world. While all the technologies and all the marketing sales bit happens, it's very important to have ads done in order to attract the right set of customers with right set of mind share and requirement on what exactly the service provider is offering that particular niche in that segment, and in the value that customers would typically need in order to fulfill their requirement. And while we look at all these factors, there are the common reasons that the income gets stagnated, and we will deep dive into some of these factors. So what happens is typically every business or every expert plateau after a certain amount of money because of various reasons. One is because of the lack of efficient system, meaning the systems have not been upgraded to the latest and greatest modern need of the hour. And it's about as the organization grow, it ultimately leads to the founder dependent processes, which needs to change in a fashion which an individual is able to make certain decision at his or her individual capacity. And then of course after some period of time, the reliances on referrals or the cold outreach is really important, because it limits the client acquisitions, and therefore there are all of these reasons which actually stifles the overall growth and productivity and the profitability of the organization. So what do we do in those cases? So obviously, as I mentioned, that specialist positioning really makes a lot of sense. Creating a particular niche, it projects your brand with certain premiumness, and then you are able to attract right set of customers who are not shying away from paying you premium for the services that they incur from you. And it's about implementation of automated systems with the use of the Gen AI technology and the agentic AIs which are available in the market. It's really become important that organizations leverage the power of some of these technologies, which actually takes care of the repeated task in a much streamlined and effective and professional manner as possible, without having any room for error, or the errors would be significantly less as opposed to a human being kind of putting their time, effort, and energy. Obviously, while having more and more human beings out there, it would lead to costly affair of the business itself. Now, if we look at what's the real path to for a scalable success, if an organization or an entrepreneur needs to look at the lens of success over a period of time, it has to have a dual transformation, which means the mindset has to be shifted, and there has to be some implementation of effective systems, which should essentially be there. And some of these things we have already spoken about: the use of VSLs for the client generation, and adopting some of these value based offerings, which are very selective, standardized, specialized, and niche for a particular target audience. And by doing so, businesses can scale from 1 to 5 lakhs very, very easily in a matter of just 1 month. And then it could further scale up to a level of 10 lakhs, an unprecedented growth that one might witness because of the USP that an organization is typically bringing to solve a very specific business problem out there in the market for the sustainability and the growth of the customer, as well as the growth of the service provider itself. Now, what are some of the things that we learned so far? Let's look at some of the recaps. Obviously, a specialist strategy for premium position really makes a lot of sense. We have already spoken about it. Next is about the scalable system. While the business gets intertwined with the kind of a productivity and profitability that an organization makes, it's also important to look at a further investment into certain areas in a priority manner, so that the business can self-sustain and scale over a period of time. Which also means that the hiring should be done with a meticulous, minutest detail to the attention possible, in order for identifying the right candidate who are able to take care of the culture. But in the modern situation, with the use of technologies, there might not be any necessity to hire some of those employees, because one can leverage the technology in the first place itself. And again, VSL for client acquisition, we did look upon these aspects, which becomes very personalized, very important for having those sort of conversation with the customers. So this is really critical for the service providers to typically look at. Now, one must look at the revenue traps which are there, and therefore we discussed about how one could create a niche, how one could look at the specialized solution, and how one could provide a specific value to the customer, for which customers are willing to pay a high ticket premium price for the offering, because he is getting more value out of the entire engagement with the service provider. Now, what are the next steps from here on? Obviously, as a service provider or a consultant or a freelancer, entrepreneur, or what have you, you got to pick a particular niche and a problem statement to solve. Find out your core VSL, because it needs to be very customized, but then the offering and the messaging remains the same in all the cases. And then automate some of these lead qualification and onboarding with the use of the Gen AI agentic AI technology, and of course focus on the value based pricing as opposed to just a transactional pricing. And after this, ultimately the overall goal, it's very important for you to understand that it's not about generalist model. It's about the specialist model, which actually wins in the long run. So think about that as an ultimate objective. And this, in fact, takes care of the scalability of your system, as opposed to just working on anything and everything without creating a niche out there in that segment. So that's about it. I hope you liked this video, and if there are any takeaways, drop in your comments. If you would like me to further work on any of the other topics, we'll be happy to work on them. Until then, see you in the next video.